Welcome to the Wholehearted Eating Podcast, where non-diet nutrition, weight-inclusive care, and integrative health collide. We're your hosts, Dana Montes and Christina Hoyt, licensed integrative clinical nutritionists and body image coaches.
And we believe you deserve to have a joyful relationship with food in your body, even if you have a chronic health condition or symptoms that just won't quit. On this show, together and with our guests, we're bringing the real talk, no BS vibe with tangible tools to help you pursue health and wellness without obsession or restriction.
Remember our disclaimer, this podcast is meant for general information purposes only and should not be taken as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
So, hey friends, welcome back to the pod. On this episode, we're going to be continuing our series on millennial body image, but with a twist, a little bit of a niche that we tend to talk about a lot on this podcast. We're going to be talking about GI issues and body image. And this is going to be GI, general GI symptoms, but also if you have a diagnosis or if you don't have a diagnosis yet, if you're kind of floating in that middle ground of like something's going wrong, not really sure what it is, but not feeling great about myself. And we're basically going to be going into how if your insides feel like garbage, your outsides aren't going to be feeling very good either in terms of body image. So it's very natural when things aren't going great internally that your body is also not going to feel awesome and you're not going to feel great about your body image either. And so we're going to be going into the gut-brain connection today. We're going to be giving you a couple of different tools if you're going through it and you're like, yeah, my guts are in a twist, but like would also love to not hate my body image today. So what can I do about that?
Yeah. No, I think it's such an important topic because I feel like it's hard to feel good in your body when your body doesn't feel good, and I think it's something that I think can often be dismissed, especially if you have like an undiagnosed GI thing and just the discomfort around that. And I think when you're feeling uncomfortable, it's okay and natural for your image of your body to feel uncomfortable and difficult at the same time. And I think, so I think for me, it's kind of like this, back and forth between the two things. Like if I could manage my GI, what would happen with my body image? And we usually conflate that with weight, because with our GI symptoms, we often feel really bloated and things like that too might be happening. And so you think like, oh, I need to lose weight or I need to manage my body first. And it's like, no, this is all a very complicated matrix of a lot of different things all happening at the same time.
Yeah. And there's a big intersection here with when we get into the gut-brain connection with your thoughts around food and your relationship with food and how that interplays with your body image, your symptoms, and your GI stuff as well. And I think we're actually going to do an entirely separate episode that kind of like continues off of this one because we wanted to primarily focus on like the actual symptoms and how that can contribute to a feeling of disconnection with your body and not feeling like you are your body, which is this very interesting feeling that tends to come up. And one of the other things we wanted to discuss is there are certain both autoimmune and gut conditions where you may hear, so for example, like both of us have celiac. A lot of the time when you hear about celiac, it's like people lose a lot of weight and they're like wasting away and everything like that. And I've had many people come tell me like, I didn't think I have celiac because I wasn't losing a lot of weight. And so we wanted to just clear the air about that kind of stuff. Is a lot of this is not about weight, and yet gut symptoms can also really affect your weight as well, which can also affect your body image when you're really going through it. So we wanted to give a couple of different examples of what this has looked like for different clients who have come to us, contributing to this feeling of disconnection and being like, is this me? Like, I don't feel like me anymore. And that can be partially the body image piece. And it can be a really big contributing factor is those symptoms. Because if you're having all of these symptoms, whether it's autoimmune or GI or both, it can really feel like your body is betraying you. And so it can feel like, well, this isn't my body, so what do I do about this? And unfortunately, a lot of the time, when you go to primary care or even if you go to GI, if you're not given concrete answers about the symptoms and what may be going on, it's like, oh yeah, just lose weight, or like, oh, just go on low FODMAP and like that'll fix everything. And as we know, not a good recommendation when you have a history of disordered eating, chronic dieting, eating disorders, because we already have too much food fear-mongering around GI issues, which can also contribute to relationship with food issues, activation of the gut-brain axis, and even more symptoms.
Oh, you really just laid it out there. It's looking bleak, guys, but I promise it's not that bleak.
No, there are going to be action steps and tools at the end of this. Don't worry. Don't worry.
I think one of the things that I was thinking about as you were like kind of like laying all that out is that, well, duh, there's going to be GI like body image stuff coming up as a result of having any kind of chronic pain, symptoms, whatever. But there is something like particularly difficult about the GI system when that happens. I think when you have like a inflammatory condition or an autoimmune condition too, that you can feel like it's difficult for you to do activities and to do things that you once were able to do. And as a result, naturally of that, like your body can change when you're going through something. If you're having a lot of inflammation, if you're having a lot of different types of things as a result of that, it's natural for your body to change. And I think one of the things that I was thinking about this is a conversation that I had with another client of mine, but from the Center of Body Trust, they talk a lot about rewriting body stories and your body's map. And I think when you're going through a GI diagnosis or an autoimmune or inflammatory condition type of diagnosis, it's really hard to write a new body map when this feels so physically uncomfortable and you feel unwell all at the same time too. So like there's this part of you, I could imagine that like there's like this part that's saying, okay, I want to rewrite this story and I want to honor my body and I want to allow this to happen. But at the same time, I physically don't feel well. Like I physically feel sick and I don't want a body map to this. Like I don't want this to be my new normal. Like I don't want to feel that way. Weight aside, body size aside, all of those things aside, it's more of like that mashup between how I'm feeling physically and how that is triggering my mind to think differently about your body. And I think that's like, to me, like the big piece around it is your body might be exactly the same, but it doesn't feel the same internally.
Yeah. And this intersects really nicely with the conversation that we had last week about how your symptoms and your mood and your body image change throughout the month with your menstrual cycle and the different phases that we go through there. Because as we talked about, there are certain phases in the cycle where you may notice that you are more symptomatic or you have more GI issues or your body image is better in different times of the month. And so it's really the perfect storm when you get in that particular time of the month and you're having a flare, regardless of where you are in the cycle. And then the cycle comes and it's like, yeah, I just want to lay in bed all day and I don't want to talk to anybody because I'm super bloated and things aren't going well symptom-wise and it just feels awful. But even beyond that, there's a big, big disconnection that can happen when you are experiencing a lot of symptoms, and whether you know the cause of those symptoms because you have a diagnosis or this is a pattern that you've been going through for a while, or you have no idea, it really, again, can feel like my body is betraying me. Like, what did I do to deserve this? I remember years ago, there was a meme that was going around that was like, I ate vegetables today and my body dared do this to me. Like, how can you? Like I'm just trying to take care of you and you still feel like you're betraying me, which is a really, really hard place to be. And we want to give some examples of what this can look like because it's not just, oh, and having disaster pants all the time. So of course I don't feel good about myself, or like, I feel like I have a pregnant looking bloated belly all the time. Not because you got a baby in there, but because you got a food baby in there or something, right? And a lot of things are
bubble guts.
Yeah, bubble guts. And like, obviously, you're not going to feel great about your body image when you have that going on. I say obviously, but it's not actually an obvious thing, right? When you look back on it, it's like, yeah, of course I didn't feel good because like I was so bloated and I had all of that other stuff and I didn't realize how much that was affecting my body image. That is something that so many clients have said to me when we're able to look back on the situation. But when you're in it, it's the hardest to see. So one example was when I was working with a client that had a pretty severe like autoimmune/inflammatory condition that also had a big gut component to it. They were talking about how their diagnosis really impacted how they felt about their body and their weight gain because of the condition. They had to be a lot more sedentary. There was a lot of inflammation going on. There was a lot of bloating. There was a lot of things. And basically, in the connection that I see with a lot of different clients that come in this situation it made you feel a lot less connected to your own body. And you don't feel like yourself in your own skin. And that's very both confusing and kind of discombobulating as well, especially when a lot of people end up in my virtual office because they've been to a lot of different practitioners and they still don't have an answer in terms of what's going on or what the game plan is to do about it. And sometimes what can happen for some people is that when you get really sick, but you've actually lost weight because of that, because your symptoms are so severe that you can like barely eat and you're clearly very malnourished and you know that. And yet you're like, but I'm losing weight. And like, that should be a good thing, right? But then it's this very weird period of cognitive dissonance because it's on one shoulder, you're like, no, you're so sick. What are you talking about? But then the old dieting brain comes out and it's like, but I got approval from my parents when I lost weight and people liked me better and I had a better self-perception of myself. And it's like, but no, you're so sick. What are you talking about? And it's very hard to be in that middle spot because it's like, well, what is right? And if we're looking at it objectively, like, yeah, of course we don't want you to be barely even able to eat anything. You're down to a list of how many foods when you come into our offices, and like, obviously for quality of life reasons, that's not the place that we want to be. And then you're like, well, wait a minute, then why is this one part of my brain still being like, but no, this is good and maybe we should keep going with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where the disordered eating disorder stuff comes in, right? Because you can easily justify, well, maybe this is worth it, and that might be like the dark and twisty thoughts that might come up for you, but it's not uncommon to have those thoughts, be like, oh, maybe this is worth it for me. Or maybe like there's that one meme that comes around like in The Devil Wears Prada where Emily Blunt says, I'm one stomach flu away from my goal weight. And she's like telling like, if I feel like I'm going to die, I'll eat a cube of cheese. And then it's like, whoa, like, oh my God, eating disorder much. I mean, that was the joke in it. Like, they were making a joke about how she was like really like starving herself.
But it's so normalized.
But it's so normalized to do that. And I think also too, like, I think in the GI world, I know this wasn't a GI thing for me, but when I lost a ton of weight postpartum with Elodie and I didn't know what was going on and I was concerned, my doctor never said squat about it. They never said anything until I went to a different person and they were like, Christina, you look unwell. And I'm like, thank you. I feel unwell. Something doesn't feel right now. Like, this is not okay. But yeah, I think like it's hard to not, one, get it dismissed. So it's kind of like, oh, and then, and at the same time, also, we live in this society that praises that. And so it, in a way, can feel good. And so, but also at the same time, like identifying that you have these symptoms that are going on that are degrading your quality of life in a lot of ways too, and showing you signs of pure malnourishment. And we have to do something about it. And I think like, this is where that body image comes up. And I see this a lot in the intersection of GI issues and eating disorder treatment a lot of times too. It's like, it's so hard for us to get them to be open to eating because they're so scared that their body will change as a result of it. And it's like you've become like emotionally attached to this GI experience that you're having because it has provided you with a body that your mind is okay with having. And that is a really complicated, hard place to be and to work through, right? But I guess like I want to normalize it a little bit if you're feeling and listening to this and kind of relating. And if you're relating to where like, oh, my body has changed and I have a lot of like, I feel puffy and I feel swollen and I feel uncomfortable and my body is changing and I feel like I have a lot of bloat and I feel like I look pregnant. It's okay to be both, right? It's okay to also to be like thinking to yourself, I wish that my body would change. And if I could just unlock the key of what is going on and causing this, then I can do something about it, which is why every functional doctor is paid so much money, is because they promise this unlocking of that key.
Yeah, and then they just do thousands of dollars worth of testing and supplements, and they never actually solve what you came into the office for.
I know. Oh. And so, but I feel like, I guess one of the things too that I would just want to note is that it's okay because in this society to have that desire and to feel this discomfort. And that's why we're talking about it, is because it's so normalized.
I wanted to bring up one other thing around the fear around introducing food as well, because of course a big part of that can be around weight gain and body change and everything. And another really important part to remember here is that for a lot of people, the fear around food is specifically because they're afraid of the symptoms or the consequences, quote unquote, that may happen physically, like internally in the immediate future, regardless of long-term body change. And this can be either a confirmation bias in the sense of like, I have eaten this food and I experienced this symptom and that was extremely uncomfortable and that negatively affected my body image and like my day, and I don't want to go that way. Or it can be oh, I've been told that this food is really inflammatory or really bad for fill in the blank symptom or health condition or something, regardless of whether or not you've actually experienced that for yourself. But that fear around the potential of symptoms is also a huge one that we will also get into shortly when we talk about the gut-brain connection.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it's hard to ignore that because this is like the intersection of where disordered eating and eating disorders come in too in a big way. And if you already have that and hello, you live in this world, you're going to have body image stuff coming up because we have a really high amount of pressure placed on that and a lot on, you know, what that provides to us and what we want around it and all of the different things with when it comes to talking about body image and our culture and the way that we prioritize that in our culture. So it makes sense that all of those things would come up as a result. I think a good example could also be like when you're having something like, you know, hormonal stuff going on, or you find out that you have fibroids. Like you can have fibroids and be really uncomfortable and feel bloated and thinking that it's GI related. And then you find out that you have fibroids and they're like the size of like grapefruits. And you're like, well, why did I? And it naturally expands your uterus. And so you're like, you can do every amount of exercise in the entire world and it's not going to get rid of those fibroids. And I think like until you know kind of like what's going on. And so like you wouldn't know that. But at the same time, it makes sense that you'd be having a difficult time between, well, what is going on here? Is there something going on internally? And why is my body changing? And I don't really know why my body's changing. And we live in this society that's obsessed with us, you know, grinding and working out. And so you go and you work out even more and you're doing all the things. You're like, why isn't my body changing? Why is my uterus getting bigger and bigger? I.e., we don't know that it's your uterus until we know that there are fibroids. And whether or not you, quote unquote, lose weight after you get your fibroids removed or not, the truth is that nothing was ever going to change despite how much food you did with food, how much you did with exercise, and all of the different things that we're typically told to do about managing those symptoms and that feeling around our body image. And I think that's like the reality check here too, is that you can have stuff going on with your symptoms and your body and having like this discomfort from like food or GI or whatever it is that's autoimmune, whatever is causing it. And we kind of tend to separate that from our body image and the things that we need to do to manage our body, you know? And I think they're not separate. They're intertwined really, really deeply. And I think it's difficult for us to untangle them and at the same time honor the fact and be like kind of like reality check ourselves that part of the reason why we're so uncomfortable with this is because we don't like that our body is changing. Or we don't want to, on the other hand, like the example that Dana gave earlier about someone who was losing so much, is maybe we don't want to address it because we like the result. And it's really complicated. So complicated. And it's interesting too, because I think this segues really well into the gut-brain connection that can happen as well too, because you think about all of the things that our GI system does and the highway that it has between the gut and our vagus nerve and our brain, the way we think, the way we feel, all of these different things. It would be ignorant to ignore the fact that what's happening in the gut can impact the way that we think, feel, and see things, the way that we see things through our own lens of emotions.
Yep. I've been thinking a lot about sound effects for the podcast lately. And as you were explaining that, I was like, okay, she's signaling that it's time for me to get into, like, let's talk about the gut-brain connection. I wish we had like a magic school bus, like it's Miss Frizzle time or whatever it is.
You know what I was thinking is like we need to hire that guy Vinny who does Bon Appetits. Like, did you ever see like what's his name? The guy with like the fermented It's Alive, Brad Leone, like how they have those pop-up videos and they're so funny. But yes, we need sound effects and little pop-ups
All right,
so that
I'll work on
everyone
that.
can know like Dana's coming in with science.
Oh, that would be
Here
great.
she comes.
Yeah. So let's talk about the gut-brain connection. So the gut-brain connection is a bidirectional highway in between your gut and your brain. It's called the vagus nerve. This is part of your nervous system. So a lot of this is involuntary. That means you have no control over what happens in the moment, but we can start to produce and create different neural pathways that make it more comfortable for your gut to want to go in a certain direction rather than jump to fight or flight. Now, granted, if your life is threatened or if your body thinks your life is threatened, you're always going to jump into fight or flight anyway, and that has saved your life.
This does not include trauma, guys. Like
Right, exactly.
you still have to do the work there. Sorry, y'all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so actually, you bring up a really interesting point because, and I think I've mentioned this on other podcasts before, but if you have a high ACE score, which is adverse childhood experiences or basically trauma, for, to whatever degree, that makes the nerves in your gut more hypersensitive. So people who have a high ACE score are more likely to have IBS and other severe gut conditions. So a little bit of a framework here, or like groundwork, right? So if you are experiencing a lot of different stresses in your life, physical symptoms, other stuff like that, you're really nervous before a presentation or a race, or just life is crazy, right? Your body is going to a lot of the time default to this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn nervous system response, which can only be, your nervous system can only be in one of two places. It can be over there, or it can be in the rest and digest part. When we're talking about the gut-brain connection and for optimal digestion and kind of bringing our symptoms down, this is what we want our default to be. Because what's happening when we're in the rest and digest piece of the digestive system and of the nervous system, things are happening better than if we're in fight or flight. Because
your body's happy, things are taking in, they're able to do stuff.
Or your body has a better opportunity in order to be able to do stuff, right? Because unfortunately, in the world that we live in, not everything is always butterflies and rainbows, even when we're in parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. But if you are more there, or if we're working towards to get you more there, that's where stomach acid is being produced. Your liver is helping your gallbladder get the bile where it needs to be so you can digest fats. Your gut motility is working very well. So food is moving through your body at the speed at which it's supposed to, as opposed to too slow, which is constipation, or too fast, which is diarrhea. And there's so many other things that are happening and are supposed to be happening when we're in rest and digest that we want to prioritize and work on getting there easier if you are dealing with a lot of GI issues. Now, if you are a person who, for a lot of different factors, who tends to be more in fight or flight, none of those things are happening. So your body is only going to choose one. Your body's not worried about digesting its food or making a baby or being fertile or anything like that if you're being chased by a tiger, because quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you're about to get eaten, right? And so when you're on that side of things, your body is not producing adequate stomach acid. It's not moving food adequately through the body. You're not helping produce beneficial bacteria. The immune system is a little bit turned off. And there are a lot of these other things that are not happening. And so you can see if we default to being in more of the fight or flight part of the nervous system, there's more of a predisposition to having gut issues, because if you've just eaten and then you go into fight or flight, your body's like, well, I guess this food's just going to sit here and it's probably going to ferment with the naturally occurring bacteria that you have, which can lead to gas and bloating. Now, this is an extremely simplified explanation for what we're doing, but we also wanted to talk about, speaking of the brain connection here, a huge amount of your serotonin, which is your feel-good neurotransmitter and hormone, is produced in the gut. So if you're having gut issues, whether that's malabsorption or malnourishment because you're not eating enough for whatever reason, or there's a lot of gas and bloating going on, or there's an improper balance of bacteria, or you've got a parasite, or you've got SIBO, or you have a whole bunch of these other things, then your serotonin production is probably going to be impacted. Your protein digestion is probably going to be impacted, and you need protein for so many different things in the body. And a lot of the different things that you want to be produced and converted, including thyroid hormone and other things like that in the gut or adjacent to the gut process, are going to be negatively impacted. And so this is why a lot of the time, especially in functional medicine circles, you'll hear like, oh, disease begins in the gut. All right, we can relax on that. But there is a
disease
lot.
begins with trauma, quite frankly. So,
well, that too. That too. And it can be both, you know, but at the same time, that doesn't mean we have to go all food fear mongering around like, oh my gosh, if you potentially have a gut issue, you have to cut out every single potentially inflammatory food. Because I'll say it once and I'll say it again and I'll say it 100 times. Unless food is the origin of the problem, aka you've got a peanut allergy or something like that, food alone cannot be the solution, even with something like celiac disease. And so we have to look beyond what are all the different factors that are going into this. Because again, if we're going back to the gut and our body doesn't have the raw materials or the ability or all of these different things in order to be able to absorb the nutrients we need to make neurotransmitters and hormones and immune system components and all these different things, we're going to be experiencing those effects body-wide and chronically until we can get to the root of what is going on with the GI system. And I want to make a point of like looking at the GI alone and only going after gut stuff on its own is extremely narrow-minded. And like, yes, even if you have some kind of something that's going on in the gut that's like not supposed to be there, either you have too much of something or not enough of something, or something is compromised in the gut, there's definitely other things going on that also need to be addressed, like with the nervous system, like with trauma, like with the immune system, like with mental health, like with all of these other things. And so when you are working with someone on this, because as you can tell, it would be impossible to address this stuff on your own, I would highly recommend someone who's going to help you see what maybe are the different pieces that are going on here and what are the different types of resources that can help you on your care team, because I guarantee you there's no one person that can kind of address all of this for you. And if they say they can, run in the other direction.
they're only looking at one part. But to be honest, one thing that I was just thinking about too, as we were talking about the serotonin and how if you don't have the raw materials to create the neurotransmitters, like you're not going to feel that great mentally. Like your mental health is going to tank. And that's no fault of your own as much as it is like this is all this stuff that's going on in the system. But I don't know about you guys, but when I'm feeling down and in a rut, I'm not feeling myself. My body image is not great. My body image is, okay, I'm feeling down and out. And so I wanted to bring it back to that a little bit so you guys can see how deeply, like, part of this is also physiological and emotional and mental and all of the different aspects that contribute to why when we're having a lot of GI chronic health conditions or symptoms, that it would be really like almost shock heard round the world if you were like, I'm happy with my body image and everything's great right now and I'm feeling wonderful. Like, no way, no way would you be feeling wonderful. I would have to say that I would imagine that maybe your symptoms aren't happening, or like what do you mean? Like you're not going to feel your best when all of these things that are going on that are required for you to have the building blocks to feeling well physically and mentally aren't being able to get absorbed and be able to get provided because we lack diversity in our diet, because we have a difficult time digesting those foods, or our body is compromised and it can't absorb the diversity of foods and nutrients that we're trying to provide it. You just can't get there. And like, we didn't even talk yet about how anxiety is like a whole nother layer that feeds into this too. And we talked a little bit about, Dana talked about it during our like science section.
The magic school bus.
The magic school bus science section of this whole conversation, that, the different like, sympathetic and parasympathetic states that we can fall into. But when we have anxiety and fear about what we're eating, we've talked about this like 1,000 times on the podcast, but if you're scared about what you're eating, whether it's because you're scared it's going to change your body in a way that you don't want, or you're scared that it's going to cause symptoms, you can't be in rest and digest. Like it's not going to happen, because you can't go into your meals thinking about how scared you are of what that meal is going to do to you. And that's where like the symptoms are going to start to come. And so it becomes this like really awful kind of cul-de-sac carousel kind of vibe where you keep going around and around and around in the circle, which is why it's so important, like Dana said, is that you have to have a team and to remember that GI issues happen at any size, and trying to change your body isn't going to resolve your GI, and having your body change doesn't mean that your GI symptoms have resolved either. And I think that's really important to kind of note in here too.
Yeah. And as you all can see, this is a really complicated mental gymnastics type situation. And this is why I get so aggravated when people are like, oh yeah, just like do the low FODMAP diet. And it's like, again, food's not going to fix the problem here, because mental health plays a huge role in it. And also changing your food is not going to change what's actually going on in the gut, right? So it's way more complicated than that. And it's also very easy to feel very overwhelmed by what I just said. So if you're struggling with this, you're not alone. Of course you're struggling with this because it's extremely complicated, right? Because like Christina said, anxiety is also going to contribute to your body defaulting into fight or flight, which again is not your fault and it's not your choice, right? And then one thing that can happen is like you're sitting down to eat and you're like, cool, okay, I'm sitting down. And then you start to get nervous about the foods and you're like, oh my gosh, should I be eating this? Should I be eating this? And you're like, wait, but I'm not supposed to be getting stressed about this. Like, what am I supposed to do?
100%. I'm so glad you're saying this, because that's exactly what I was about to say. It's like almost like it's so normal for you to sit down at the meal and be like, now what the fuck am I supposed to do now, guys? Like, what do I do now? Because I can't undo this anxiousness around the food because I feel physically unwell, and there is a direct result that happens. I don't want to use like consequence, but there's a result that happens because of some of these things because of what I have noticed is food. And yes, anxiety might be part of it. Yes, vagus nerve stuff might be happening too. Nervous system things might be happening too. Yes, autoimmune things could be happening. Yes, GI things are happening. Gut things are happening. Bacterial load is happening. All of these things can be happening, but we can't control all of those things simultaneously at one time to sit down on a pillow, eat our meal and say, I am absorbing all of the nutrients and I'm getting everything that I need right now. Like it just doesn't happen like that. So I think it's like this, I keep going back to the saying of like a complex matrix and how it is like all these different things and all these different parts and all these different points. And I think the collective point is it's okay to be struggling with your body image while you're dealing with all of this.
And it would be shocking if you weren't.
Exactly. Like, how could you not be? How could you not have a complicated relationship with your body? How could you not have a complicated relationship with food right now? How could you not feel all of these different things when you're feeling so disconnected from your body because of all these things that you're going through? And you're hearing us talk about all the different aspects that play a role. And you're probably thinking, what do we do now, guys? Because I see that you want to have support and that you need and deserve to have a respite, like we want to have some relief here. So let's go into some tools. Dana's going to start us off and we're going to go into some stuff that we think would be really helpful to support you guys while you're walking through this labyrinth of stuff.
Yeah, because it's complicated, right? And we don't want this episode to just be like, yeah, this stinks and we get it. And this is why it's so complicated. Because that is helpful, right? At the same time, we always want to make sure we leave you with some things to think about, leading with compassion and curiosity and things that like some action steps that you can do at home, maybe after listening to this episode today, tomorrow, whenever you want to, aside from just, we recommend you work with a practitioner, which obviously is something that we always recommend. So the first thing that I always take clients through and explain them about is that if you have this really complicated intersection of symptoms and body image and it keeps going back and forth, we don't actually start with the body image piece. We start by normalizing, of course you're having body image issues because if you're having disaster pants every other hour, there's no way you're going to feel good about your body. So the more actionable thing is let's work on why you having disaster pants, right? So we're going for symptom management first. And Christina's losing it.
I'm laughing because it reminds me of a friend of mine who I will not name names, and it's not you, but it was another friend of mine where she was telling me.
Good to know you're not outing me on the podcast.
I have this friend who was like having disaster pants, and she went to her doctor and said, "Hey doc, it's not holding it in anymore." And that's how she described it. And like Casey and I died laughing. We were like, that is the best way of describing it. Like, hey, it's not holding it in. I don't know why.
The doctor was probably like, it sounds like you have IBS. And then they went home and nothing happened.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. But so obviously if that is happening to you, how possibly could your body image be even neutral, right? Obviously it's not going to be great.
And think about the downward effect of that, right, too? It's like, okay, so your body image just probably doesn't feel that great. You probably are having a hard time socially because you don't know when it's going to happen when you're out. And so there's a lot of strategy around that. Maybe it's hard for you to go to work and like all the different things like the trickle down effect. So then your mental health doesn't feel as good. There's so many different factors. Like it's like blah.
Yep. You're not absorbing anything. You're very dehydrated all the time. We're going to probably start to see nutrient deficiencies in your blood work and all over the place. And yeah. So we're going to go for symptom management first. Why are you having disaster pants all the time, right? Which we can look at in a couple of different ways. And I also wanted to mention, if you have ever wondered about, speaking of GI, if you've ever wondered about stool testing, we're going to be next week doing a walkthrough of an example stool test and like who is stool testing good for? And like, should I even consider this? Is it worth it for me? How much does it cost? Like, what do tests actually do? And we're going to do a walkthrough of the GI map as our Patreon exclusive episode for the end of the month for next week. So that will be linked in the
Honestly,
show
I'm really
notes.
excited about this because I don't really do a lot of GI mapping. So I usually call Dana and say, let's talk about this. So I feel like I'm going to learn a lot from this episode too, you guys. And I'm very excited.
Yeah. So this is a test I use with clients when we do stool testing. And I'll talk about how, like, I don't recommend this for everyone. And I don't think everyone needs a stool test. At a certain point, it can be really helpful. So we're going to be going through that next week. That is one of the tools that both the Patreon episode and actual stool testing is available as a diagnostic tool, and there's different kinds of stool testing if you go to your GI doctor versus if you get a more comprehensive test and blah, blah, blah. We'll go into it next week. That's one tool that's available. Another tool that is available that you could go for right now is, when I mentioned before, we want to give your body the best opportunity possible to be in rest and digest, to be able to digest and absorb your foods. A really helpful tool that there's more new and emerging research about is called gut-directed hypnotherapy. We mentioned this a couple of weeks ago on the episode with Kate Scarlotta, and I think she mentioned this tool, but I'll mention it again. There's an app called Nerva, which is basically gut-directed hypnotherapy in the form of like a chronic symptom management lens of meditation and mindfulness on an app that you can just like get on your phone. And they have studies around it that shows that it's really, really helpful within a couple of weeks. And so we'll put the link to that in the show notes. A bunch of my clients use it and they've found great success with it. The downside is you do have to use it consistently, just like anything, right? So it's just one of the tools that is available for you.
But if you can stick to one of these really restrictive protocols that you've been doing before, you should be able to stick to Nerva for a couple of days. Just throwing that out there.
Well, yeah. Logically, that makes sense. But I guarantee everyone listening to this is like, no. It's way easier to do a diet.
I know. Well, that's exactly what I'm just calling, like poking you guys a little bit, challenging you a little bit to be like, wait a minute, why is it so easy for me to go to the diet than it is for me to go to this idea of meditation and mindfulness, even though it is also very science-backed. And some of the food stuff we're doing
is not.
Despite
pseudoscience.
Despite what the celebrity doctor is telling you.
Seriously, speaking of that and speaking of pseudoscience, we're going to be doing another gut trends episode and breaking down the stuff that's like super popular and trendy right now in 2 weeks, I think. So you all can look forward to that. But back to tools. So Nerva is one of those really great, both short-term and long-term tools that you can use. It's like I can use this right here, right now in the moment. And I know that if I use this consistently, it will help me over time be more easily able to switch into rest and digest and away from fight or flight. So that's a great tool. And what we really want to look at here in this category of things is nervous system regulation, which can be both short-term and long-term. So when we're looking at nervous system regulation, what we're really referring to is, how do I calm my body down in certain situations so it's easier for me to switch into rest and digest and out of fight or flight when it is appropriate for my body to do so. So there are a bunch of different tools that you can use to help switch or lean, let's say, towards rest and digest, specifically around meal times. We will share those in the show notes and it'll be linked on Patreon with more tips for how you can do that. And this does not have to be, I'm sitting alone at a meal and everything is quiet and I'm staring at the wall and I'm chewing my scrambled eggs 50 times, because that is disgusting. And that's not what we're going to be recommending.
I also think too, I think one of the things also that I see this a lot in eating disorder treatment too, is that sometimes something that's really regulating can be just watching TV while you eat. Something that can take your mind off of what you're doing and put you someplace else. If what you're watching is relaxing and you kind of chill, that can be grounding. And so I think sometimes there's these ideas around what it looks like to eat in a mindful manner. But sometimes when we have quietness and everything like that, that doesn't create internal safety for everybody. And so sometimes safety comes in different forms. And this is where working with a practitioner to help you figure out your own unique safety and internal safety around these types of things so that you can be less activated all the time around, or when you're just eating, even to come up with some tools can be really beneficial. And I just want you to know that it doesn't have to be like what you're reading about with like certain types of things like, oh, I'm sitting on a pillow and I'm eating this and it's silent and I'm chewing and I'm absorbing the flavors and like all of the different things. That might be really helpful, but we might not be there yet.
Yeah, probably a long time down the line.
That's what I mean. Like,
stuff.
we're not there yet. Like, that's a long time away from now. Exactly.
Let me put in a de-influencing recommendation in here too. So, right, here's things that you can add in and do, and there's things that we recommend you stay away from. Don't start taking random supplements.
Let's say it again. Don't start taking random supplements. I have a really great story about this, actually. Okay. I had a client recently reach out to me. Love them, understand why they did what they did, but they purchased a supplement that was recommended to them like 10 years earlier. And then they had a heart incident where they had to go to the emergency room. They had like a heart palpitations and everything. We were talking about like what was going on, like what caused this. And they said, yeah, they couldn't find a reason for why this was happening. I don't know why. And I said, well, why don't you walk me through what supplements you're taking? Because we only recommended this one and I don't think it would cause this issue, blah, blah, blah. They said, oh yeah, well, I also started taking this other one that someone had recommended to me 10 years prior and it had 5-HTP in it. And they were already taking a serotonin SSRI. And I said, whoa, this is why you don't just start taking random stuff. Well, what can happen is if you're taking and at the time when the practitioner recommended to them, it was completely legit and everything. They were not taking an SSRI at the time, but an SSRI is a serotonin
selective reuptake inhibitor. Yeah.
Yeah. What can happen is if you take something with 5-HTP in it, it can actually increase that and make it so that you make too much.
Serotonin syndrome.
Yes. And you can have serotonin syndrome, which looks and feels like a lot like a heart attack.
Yikes. Yeah.
So, but that's why, like, I'm going to just say that. Don't start taking random supplements, because if you listened to our other episode where we talked about, Dana mentioned something about the FDA coming down on Amazon.
Yes, that was in the 75 No Thanks, I'm Busy That Day episode.
Yeah, because we don't know, like sometimes they're not disclosing what's in it. And so if you don't have a practitioner vetting what you're doing against what you're taking right now,
including medications.
Including medications, because as much as we think like, oh, supplements are fine, it's just like a supplement. It's like, actually, no, there's a lot of things that have interactions with each other, and you could really be doing damage to yourself or scaring the bejesus out of yourself like this person did.
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to them. And this is like not and it was not like something like what they didn't think about it. The minute I said it, they go, oh my God, I wasn't taking this back then.
Yeah.
Like they immediately knew. And so don't start taking random supplements, even if you read it on a blog.
Yeah. Especially with, heart stuff and brain stuff is extremely serious. And with gut stuff too, gut supplements are so individualized. Like there is no single supplement that is going to work for everybody. And so you may start taking something that a whole bunch, there could be 80,000 reviews on Amazon. Oh my gosh, this is so good. It may make your symptoms worse. I was actually just talking to a client yesterday and they were like, yeah, I ordered this because, I heard it was good and, blah, blah, blah. And they were having like a lot of kind of heartburn, like a lot of belching and stuff like that. And I was like, well, it may be, this thing in what you just started taking. So like, let's try something else or like just take a break from that and see how it goes. And just don't start taking random stuff. Get a second opinion from a practitioner that you're working with who's looking through your current symptoms, supplements, medications, health history, blood work, all the things, which we know is a lot. It's way easier to just order a supplement off of Amazon and be like, hey, hope this works. And one other thing to remember too is that the root cause of what's going on for you can be different, even if your symptoms are the same as someone else. And that is what makes gut stuff so difficult. Thyroid stuff and adrenal stuff also, and hormone stuff. But that's what makes
Literally everything
all
is
of this so
personalized.
complicated.
Because if we go back to the matrix idea and how complicated each thing is, each person's like what they're bringing to the table is different. And so how you might be experiencing things, you might really relate to somebody who's on Reddit talking about their symptoms and what they're going through. But sometimes symptoms mimic other symptoms. Like you might have the same symptom, but two different root causes. And that doesn't mean that you have to go and start doing exactly what that person's doing, because your root cause could be its own little gobbledygook of matrix items that are coming together, you know?
Yep. TLDR, gut stuff is complicated. And if you're having gut stuff, your body image is not going to be great. And that's okay.
I really love how recently you've been doing the TLDR. Like you've been doing that in like I think like the last like 4 or 5 episodes, you go TLDR. And then you're like,
I mean, honestly, listen, sometimes when I listen to podcasts or YouTube or whatever, I'm definitely zoning out. And I'm like, TLDR, they're going to tell me what I just missed.
it's like one of my favorite things about the burnout book is that they have the TLDR. I'm like, let me just skip everything else. I get it. All right. I get the idea. Just give me what I need to do and let's get into it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, as we mentioned before, a bunch of these tools will be noted in the show notes. We'll share them on Patreon. And as a reminder, next week's episode is a Patreon exclusive. We're going to be doing stool testing questions and walkthrough of an example stool test and everything like that. So if you have questions about stool testing in general, who should get a stool test, who shouldn't waste their money on a stool test, what kinds of stool tests are out there, because my God, there are so many of them.
So many.
Shoot it to us in an email, hello@wholeheartedeating.com. You can find us on Instagram. If you have any questions, that would be great. If you're loving the show, we would love to get a review from you wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Overcast, wherever. It helps more people find the show, and we would love you forever.